Welcome everybody back to the channel here. Today is an exciting day. We have a new video coming out in a series of videos. This is the first one. It's going to be titled Airbus Professional Series. In this series of videos, we're going to take a day in the life of an actual Airbus pilot, and I'm going to walk you through it from cold and dark arriving at the aircraft to shutting down and heading into the hotel van and hopefully off to the bar later. So I have another series out right now called the Pilot Series, and that series is going to be more system related topics and maybe kind of offhand things that you would see not necessarily every day. This series is strictly going to be a tutorial slash example of how to run this aircraft in a professional manner as a line pilot would do day in and day out flying the line. So with that being said, let's get started. We are flying the Flight Factor Airbus A320 Ultimate. Alright, first thing that happens when the crew walks down to the aircraft, we need to establish electrical power, and we do that by starting out with a series of flow patterns or checks. So essentially we come down here, we start out, make sure the radar and PWS is off, engine mode selectors in normal, engine master switch is off, make sure the thrust levers are in idle. I've been having this aircraft spawn in with them in TOCA, so thrust levers idle, landing gear lever down, up to the overhead, windshield wipers off, and then straight to our batteries. We're looking at our battery voltages here. We need to have 25.6 or greater. If they're below that, we need to do a charging procedure on the batteries. Right now we have plenty of juice. We'll go ahead and fire up battery 1. That powers the off light for battery 2. Now, we'll go ahead and turn that off. In the real aircraft, it's pretty hard to tell the position of these switches, as they're very small push button switches. So if you look here, an easy way to tell if the battery's on or not is look at your landing gear annunciator lights. When you power the batteries, battery 1 and battery 2, you will now have your landing gear indicator lights illuminated, as well as some flags in the IESS. So that's just a quick way to tell, even without looking at the overhead panel when you walk into the cockpit, if the batteries were left on or not. Alright, so we got battery power on. Now we need to establish some form of electrical, sufficient electrical power. Where I work, very common, we use ground power. So we have it available here. You can see it's got the green avail light. Go ahead and turn that on. As that boots up here, you'll notice that the screen's going to self-test for 40 seconds. We need to wait, make sure all the screens come to life. Alright, as the screens come to life here, we're going to do the fire test here for the APU. We've got annunciator lights, the squib discharge, master caution warning, and the APU fire light. After the APU is tested, then we just come right back down here. We would typically start the APU if we needed to. We don't need to start the APU while running on ground power. We'll go ahead and keep the seatbelt signs off. We'll arm the emergency exit lights. Drop us down to our console here. Parking brake is set, flaps are up, speed brake is in the up position, or I should say retracted position. Probe and window heat. This is a big one right here. Alright guys, when it comes to the probe and window heat, I see a lot of guys taxiing their airplane out the runway with this push button on. That's actually incorrect. If you understand how the Airbus anti-ice and de-ice systems work, is after first engine start, the windows and the probes will automatically become heated. They'll be heated in what's known as low mode. As soon as the weight off wheels, or when the aircraft becomes airborne, these heating elements will then go into high mode or their in-flight mode and will work throughout the flight. Now, the only time we would actually use the probe and window heat push button is if you arrive at the aircraft and it's been snowing all night or there's ice accumulation and you notice that your window is frosted over and there's snow all over the probes and whatnot. Then we would go ahead and press this button when we're sitting at the gate to go ahead and get the snow and ice melted from the aircraft. But once the first engine is started, it's no longer required. It's automatically taken over by the Airbus anti-ice and de-ice system. The EgyptWiz panel here has an enhanced feature. It is a 3D database built in the terrain function. So it is normal to see a fault light in the terrain push button when the aircraft doesn't know where you are. Because if it doesn't know where you are, it can't find you in the database to tell you where the terrain is. So until the aircraft becomes aligned, you should see a fault light here in your terrain during the EgyptWhiz pre-flight. I skipped over a switch. The ground control push button, this would also be on. This is not modeled. I cannot press this push button. It needs to be modeled because this needs to be on. This will record all cockpit communications prior to first engine start onto the CVR in the event that something goes wrong and they have to pull the tapes. They want to make sure that the CVR was reporting during pre-flight operations. Once a first engine is started, this push button will no longer be necessary as the CVR is now recording automatically. As we come up to our evacuation panel here, we want to make sure it is captain only. This allows the captain to only initiate an evacuation, not the flight attendants in the back. No fault lights, and then we'll go ahead and align our ADIRs. We start with ADIR 1. We always want to make sure that the on-bat light will illuminate and extinguish prior to selecting the subsequent ADIR system. This is so that we know if the aircraft loses primary electrical power, the ADIRs have the ability to revert back to battery power. That's very important. Must check that during our pre-flight. Those work. Now we come back down here, we run up the second side of the panel. Let's configure our lights. We're going to go ahead and put nav logo into the number 1 position. 2 sets of lights on the wingtips for redundancy. We use it back and forth so they get an equal burn time. If the captain's flying, we put it on 1. The first officer's flying, we'll put it on 2. Everything else looks good here. We move up, engine AIS, make sure it's off. Again, checking the temperatures. And our cockpit lights. So right now I've got the overhead on. We can go ahead and turn the dome light on if we want. That will conclude the overhead during our pre-flight. After the overhead has been completed, we come down here and we do a quick systems check here. We want to make sure that our hydraulic fluids are adequate. We want to make sure that on the engine page our oil quantities are adequate and above our limits. And then, of course, our oxygen PSI right here. This is referring to crew oxygen. We want to make sure that it's in the green and ready for flight. Also, we like to press a recall. This will bring up any faults that have been cleared out. As you saw, firing up the aircraft, we have a nav TCAS fault. That is normal. I cleared that fault. I pressed the recall. Then we also hit the status page, make sure there's no in-op systems that we don't know about. So that looks normal for right now. We'll go ahead and hop outside and do our pre-flight. As we come down the stairs from the jet bridge and we're pre-flighting the exterior of the aircraft, we start on the front left side of the cockpit, making sure that the RVSM here, this area is clear and free of dents. So basically RVSM, that's reduced vertical separation at high altitudes. All airliners, not all, most of them are equipped to operate in that airspace. There's several pieces of equipment that are required. Also, we want to make sure that the area in this critical area is clear of any debris, bird strikes, dents, anything of that nature. As we move down around to the front of the nose here, we could see, want to inspect the nose gear. We have our runway turn-off lights. Those illuminate the runway exit signs and exit pass. Our taxi light and landing light, we want to make sure that they are not cracked. As we walk around the aircraft, we come to the avionics ventilation duct right here, and this is actually modeled. So basically what happens when the aircraft skin temperature reaches a predetermined limit, this will actually open up and you will hear a lot of air coming out of this hole. And I've actually seen it with this flight factor 320 be simulated properly. Right now it's a cool morning, so it is closed, no need for it to be blowing. However, when it does open up, there is a rush of air coming out of there. That's where a lot of guys stand to get cool, especially in the summertime. As we walk around the aircraft and get to the main landing gear, we want to check for any leaks coming off here. We want to make sure that the landing gear pin has been removed. There's a clamshell style pin that clamshell style clamp that goes here, prevents retraction of the landing gear if they have to do maintenance on the aircraft. Want to make sure that that is removed. And something that's really cool that's modeled here is brake wear indicator pins. So it's kind of hard to see in this light, but this pin right here actually goes all the way through and presses on the brake pad. Now as the aircraft brakes wear, this pin gets shorter and shorter. Once this pin is inside of this housing here, we know it's time to replace the brakes and we have to do it right up. It's cool to see the level of detail there on those landing gear. As we come to the front of the engine, we make sure that all the fan blades are in good working order, no nicks. And as you come around to the side of the engine, you want to make sure all of the doors and panels are closed. Nobody left the oil service door open or anything of that nature. Fun fact about this panel right here, this is where the fire bottles for the engines go. And the fire bottles for the engines actually look kind of like basketballs. They're spherical in nature, and that is why this door is a round door, so you get the fire bottles in and out. As we walk along the leading edge of the wing here, we want to make sure that there is no damage to the leading edge, no flaps, no damage to the leading edge or marks. Looking at the back of the wing, make sure our static wicks are there, everything is in good working order. Get to the aft cargo compartment and all the way to the tail of the aircraft. As we get to the tail, there's a couple of service doors right here on the belly. One of them is actually a waste service door. So that is where the ground crew will come and remove human waste from the aircraft. So it is very important, as anybody who does pre-flights in real life knows, do not walk directly under that latch, because it sometimes might be leaking, and I promise you it is not water that is leaking from that hatch. A couple of things to take note here is make sure that the outflow valve is open, no damage to the terminal horizontal stabilizer, or THS as it's commonly referred to on the Airbus. APU exhaust, make sure our position light is working. As we get to the tail, we want to make sure that the THS has reset to 0. After landing, the THS automatically resets to 0. We want to make sure that that is indeed correct. And as we come to the left side of the aircraft, everything is the same that we did on the other side. One thing I do want to note is when you come to the external, or the wingtips here, when we said we have the two position switches on the nav lights, we have nav 1 and nav 2. And these alternate in between. So when you change those switches, these are the bulbs that you're actually changing. If one of these bulbs were burnt out, we could just go ahead and set it to the second set of nav lights and use those nav lights and not have to delay the flight for maintenance operation. Alright, back into the cockpit now. We come back up into the cockpit, we get everything set up. Build our nest is what we call it, get our bags out, make sure everything is in a good working order that we want it to. We'll go ahead and send for clearance and start programming the McDo. So with the McDo, we have a procedure that we call diffs rip. I'm going to put it here so you can see it. What we need to do is start with the data page. We go data, aircraft status, and we make sure that the nav database is current. Mine is obviously not current, but in the real aircraft this would be current. We want to make sure that that is correct. We can also see the type of engine that we have. Alright, after the D and diffrip on data, then we go to the I, initialization. So on the initialization page, this is where we put in our departure and destination. So we're going to go from BFW Phoenix this morning. We're going to be flight factor 320 as our call sign. Do not have an alternate. We're not going to place an alternate. We're going to fly cost index 30. Basically, in short, what cost index does is allows the owner and operator of the aircraft to control the efficiency of how the aircraft is flown. If we are cost indexed at 0, the aircraft will fly much slower but preserve much more fuel. If we fly cost index 99, we'll get there a lot faster, but we're going to burn a lot more fuel. So there's a balance, and it depends between flights which cost index that your dispatcher has sent you to fly. And that'll be on the paperwork. Also on the paperwork, we'll have a cruising altitude. We're going to be flying 360 over to Phoenix this morning. This auto-populates the standard temp. What we want to do is put the actual temp from our flight plan data. We know that it's going to be negative 60 degrees according to our flight plan, so we'll go ahead and hard tune that, get more accurate numbers. Also, since the aircraft was cold and dark, we do have to initialize and align on ref, so we'll go ahead and press align on ref, confirm alignment. The aircraft will complete its alignment. So that was the I page, initialization. Now we go to F, which is flight plan. First thing we want to do, go to our departure, build from the ends. We're going to depart this morning off of runway 17 right. We're going to take the departure procedure West Tex 2. Out to SICAN. So how did I get that transition? Is once you select your departure, if you arrow right, you can come to transitions, SICAN, insert, and now we always want to build in plan mode on our ND so we can see what we're doing. We can kind of start to see our flight plan come together here. After SICAN, the next fix is Echo Whiskey Mike. Then driver, Delta, Romeo, Romeo, Victor, Romeo. Then I'll go ahead and insert that. I typically only insert 2 fixes before pressing the insert button. That way, if I make a mistake, I don't have to erase everything that I put in. If you wait to the very end to press the insert button, you made a mistake, now you got to redo everything. And then the arrival is PINNG. Oops, that's not correct. So we've got our flight. Now we're going to go ahead and put the arrival in. We're going to plan to land on runway 28 left. I'm sorry, 25 left. We're going to take arrival is going to be the ping 1 arrival. Now, what should happen is I should have some transitions right here, but I've noticed if I page over, I can also pull them up. This, we're going to take the driver transition, insert. Now we can go ahead and step through our flight plan. And we can see that there are no erroneous items. So always want to check your flight plan, how you step through it. Make sure you have your selector mode here into plan mode, and when you press the flight plan key, that'll bring you to the top of your flight plan. If you press the airport key, it brings you to the bottom of your flight plan. So always hit flight plan, and then go ahead and scroll. Make sure that there are no discontinuities in your flight plan, and that everything looks good and according to what you're expecting. Alright, so that's the F in diffstrip. Now we're going to go into the S. The S in diffstrip, there's 3 of them. It stands for secondary flight plan. We press the secondary flight plan key once, we're going to initialize a secondary flight plan. So why is a secondary flight plan so important? Well, a secondary flight plan allows the flight crew to put in a approach and landing data, so if they have an engine failure or an emergency and they need to return back to the airport that they just took off from, they don't have to worry about programming the box. They already have it loaded. So we do it on every flight, and sometimes we put a single engine procedure in here, something that's very complex. Most of the time, we just put the runway that we would like to land on when we come back in. So we're departing off of Dallas-Fort Worth. We're going to go ahead and just put a round-robin flight plan on the initialization. DFW, DFW. Alright. Now that was the first S. Now the second S, we hit secondary flight plan again. Let's go ahead and plan the secondary flight plan. So this is our round robin that we just put in here. We're going to go ahead and select arrival. Typically you're going to select the longest runway that you want to land on. I know I want to return to runway 17 right. And then the third S is the performance for that. So we don't care about takeoff performance, we don't care about climb, cruise, descent. The only thing we care about is the approach performance when we come back into the airport. So we need to find the correct altimeter setting here first. 3002. The temperature, I like to read that off of the aircraft right there, 4 degrees. Wind, we're going to go ahead and zero it out. Standard transition for us in the United States is 18,000 feet. That will vary depending on where you're flying at. Also, we want to put our minimum descent altitude for the approach. You're going to get this off of your approach plate for the runway that you just put in the box. So we have an MDA of 767 off the ILS 17 right. So that takes care of our 3 S's. We hit S once to initialize the flight plan, Dallas to Dallas. We hit secondary again to plan the flight plan. What do we want to do? We want to do an approach back into Dallas. And then we hit secondary again, and we put in the performance only for the approach. This way, if we have an engine failure or an emergency we need to land, all we have to do is activate the secondary flight plan and fly the airplane. No playing around in the McDo. Alright, so that is S's taken care of. Now we go to R. This is the radio navigation page. You can leave this to auto-tune. Sometimes we hard-tune. Depending on what kind of departure procedure you're flying, if it requires a specific turn off of a specific DME, then you'll go ahead and hard-tune that. We'll go ahead and put TTT, which is Maverick VOR, in the VOR1 hard-tune. So now when I activate my VOR here, you can see I have TTT right here on my information. It's hard-tuned. It's not going anywhere. This to me looks like a discrepancy. These two should be talking to each other. So I'm not sure why this is Echo Whiskey Mike. This is Buoy Uniform Kilo Whiskey. That's just an error there. Alright, so the rad nav page is taken care of, and then we have another I that stands for initialization page B. This is where we go ahead and put in our load sheet and all of the information that we've received. So in order to get our zero fuel weight and zero fuel weight CG, in the real world it's depicted on our paperwork. For here, in the sim world, you can go ahead and put it in from here, or what I like to do is on your service, let's go ahead and make sure everything's loaded up. I'm going to go ahead and put the cargo, press set. For the passengers, we're going to go ahead and keep it full. We'll press set. The fuel, we have 9.5 required and on board, so we're going to go ahead and just set that. Now as we come back to the performance data, all that information is now in our EFB. What we can do is we just press this weight request button right here, and now our zero fuel weight, 58.9, matches the zero fuel weight right here, and our zero fuel weight CG matches our zero fuel weight CG right here, 26.7. We can see that the aircraft is within limits and that we are going to be okay. You can also hit weight boarding. I'm not sure what the function of the weight boarding button does. If one of you guys know in the comments, let me know. I'm curious to what the second option here, weight boarding, what that does, if that changes anything. Well, let me know in the comments. I'm still looking to figure out what that does. But anyway, we want to make sure our zero fuel weight and zero fuel weight CG are put down. Also, the last thing you want to check is your block fuel. This is your fuel on board. 9.5, 9.48, close enough. That matches. So that was initialization page B. Now we have two P's. Last things we need to do. Our progress page here, we want to make sure the GPS is primary and nav accuracy is high. Also, for added redundancy, I always throw in the departure, airport, and runway. So I have a quick and dirty bearing and distance. Always got to have redundancy. You never know when you might want to just look down at your FMS and see your direct distance to Dallas or your departure airport. Then the last P is performance takeoff data. So what we do in the real airplane is I have taken, or I will take, all the paperwork I receive at the gate from the gate agents, where people are loaded, how many people we have. The ground crew will come up and tell me how many bags they loaded, where they loaded them, what they weigh. I put all that information into a 8-car system, or the ATSU system here. I send that off to a third-party program by pressing the send button. They come back with all of the performance data and information. And all I have to do is hit uplink, and when I uplink it, it will auto-populate all this information here in the box. We don't have that luxury in the flight sim world right now, so we kind of have to wing it. I'll make a separate video maybe down the line about calculating V-speeds and all that. But for right now, very simple. We're going to plan a flaps 1 takeoff. We're going to flex to 55. And then we can go ahead and put in, if you click, you get 2 speeds here and then a V-speed. Now, these speeds are not near as conservative as the one that we get back. The ones that we get back are much higher than the ones I see the Flight Factor Airbus produce. So I don't know what they use or what method they use to get these numbers, but I can tell you ours are much higher in the real airplane. So I'm going to go ahead and just use one that I used recently. 155, 163, and then a 153. Transition altitude depends on where you're flying. You gotta make sure you set that to standard is 18,000 feet here. So our performance data is now set. Our diff strip is complete. We are ready to run a pre-flight checklist. So the pre-flight checklist will call for it, maintenance log and tail number. I want to make sure that that is on board and checked. Basically the maintenance can, the logbook of the aircraft. Gear pins and covers removed. We check that outside. The signs, cabin signs are on and auto. We'll also go ahead and turn the fuel pumps on. Should have done that before I did the flow there. That is also my reminder to get the APU fired up. Signs are on and auto. ADIRS, nav mode, fuel, 9.0 required, 9.4 on board. Altimeters, 3001 is set. And then we would check our EFB, make sure it's plugged in, power, everything. So, pre-flight checklist complete. Flap open message here on the APU. Press the start switch. Now you noticed I didn't press the power switch to start the APU right away. That is because when you start the APU, we have to wait for this flap open message to appear. When I power up the master APU computer, it runs a self-test checking the APU for any deficiencies, specifically low oil. The only way we're going to tell if we have low oil is if we wait to start the APU until that flap open message turns on. Alright, our APU is now available. We'll go ahead and disconnect from the external ground power. We can tell the maintenance guy, or I'm not the maintenance guy, we can tell the ground crew that, hey, you can go ahead and remove ground power. At this point, we'll probably start hearing these noises. The doors are closing up. The gate agent is getting ready to close the door. And the fuel truck has been gone, hopefully for a little while now. All set. So now our aircraft is set up and ready for a before start checklist. Windows, doors, and slides. They are closed and armed. You can tell by the slide indications that they are armed. All green means that they are closed. Closed and armed. Beacon. On. Thrust levers. Idle. Parking brake is on for now, and then transponder. I forgot to program that here when we got our clearance. We'll go ahead and put that into auto mode, and we'll also put in our squawk today of 1577. So the auto mode, we'll keep the TCAS portion in standby for now. I'll put that in above for taking off. And we are set, transponder. Before start check is complete. Alright, we'll go ahead and call the ground crew, say, hey, we need pushback. Alright, so we've got our clearance from ground. Hey, we need to ready to push. Let's say push tail in the alley. We'll tell the tug driver we need tail in the alley. And at this point, we are just waiting for our pushback. Also, I forgot to mention up here, guys, on the FCU, when you get your clearance, we'll go ahead and put our top altitude. Our top altitude for our clearance is 10,000 feet. We want to make sure that there's all dashes here. That looks good. If there's not, say there's something like that, what we'll do is we'd go ahead and clear your flight directors and then put your flight directors back on, and now you are set correctly. All dashes, top altitude. Constraint mode's on. What constraints do, if you're unfamiliar, they will basically just show you these restrictions here on your flight plan.
Okay, all doors and hatches are closed. Ready to connect. Tow connected and bypass pin inserted. Release parking brake.
Brakes released, clear to push, tail in the alley.
Starting pushback. And you may start engines.
Alright, as he's pushing us back from the gate, we've got a cleared to start indication from him. We want to make sure that we clear the gate area. That's just company procedure before we start anything. For start flow, we'll go ahead and get the APU bleed on. Engine master mode to ignition start. We have our bleed pressure. And we'll go ahead and start engine 1. Starting 1, start the timer. The reason we start the timer is we need to monitor our runtime of the starter motor. So if we have a mechanical problem, we want to make sure that we know what our limitation is, but not going to exceed it by trying to do subsequent start attempts. That's pretty scary right there. That's the scariest part on the airfield right here. It's S service road. Alright, we've got an avail indication. Good start on engine number 1. Since the aircraft sat overnight and it was cold, we need a 5-minute warm-up after each start, so it's very common to actually do a 2-engine taxi. We'll go ahead and start the second engine so that engine can go ahead and get warmed up. While we're monitoring the start here on our EWDs, we want to make sure that everything's coming to life. Our oil pressure starts to come up, our N2, and our fuel flows. Now, there is no manual start aborting in a normal start. The aircraft is smart enough to sense an overheat or stalled start, hung start, whatever you want to call it, and will actually terminate the start. So we don't even really guard those switches during a normal start. The aircraft is smart enough to know when to abort the engine start sequence.
Operation complete. Set parking brake.
Brake set, clear disconnect, show me the pin.
Disconnecting tow. Stand by.
There's a veil number 2. We'll go ahead and reset the chrono. Want to make sure that we do have a sufficient warm-up time. Alright, after start flow, that goes back to normal. Arm the spoilers, reset your rudder trim, flaps set for takeoff. One thing that we don't really do in the sim world, but I'll show you guys here, is we want to make sure our intercom buttons are into intercom after we disconnect from the tug driver. Reason for that is when those are in intercom mode, the mic connection from the cockpit to the ground crew is a hot mic. So anything you're saying up front, if you're saying anything bad, they're going to hear you. So that may not work out too good for you if you start saying bad things.
Disconnected and bypass pin has been removed. Hand signal on the right. We'll see you next time and have a safe flight.
Alright, trim is set for takeoff. Over the overhead, APU bleed off. APU master switch off. And we are just waiting for a hand signal from the tug driver that he has removed the nose wheel steering pin. We can tell now that we have a good indication, but we always want to verify that he walks away with it. There he is. There's the pin. Flash him with the light. We'll call for taxi. So, ground flight factor 320, ready to taxi off of Echo 9. Say flight factor 320, taxi 17 right, Kilo Echo Golf. Kilo Echo Golf 17 right for flight factor 320. as we clear the ramp area here, we're going to do a brake check. So we want to make sure that the aircraft has reverted to normal braking law. So when we go ahead, we'll just tap the brakes while looking at the accumulator gauge. We have no increase in pressure. That means we're in normal braking mode. So that checks. Now we can do what's called a mini brief. Mini brief, we brief everything that's pertinent to our takeoff. So for instance, runway 17 right, departing off the Westex 2 departure. That would be depicted here. This is incorrect on the McDo. They should have the SID depicted on the flight plan. Westex 2 departure, gross weight 68.3, flaps config 1+F, fuel on board 9.3, speeds, read it from the glass, 153, 163, flexing 55 degrees Celsius. We have a standard transition. First fix is RNAV to LARN. Alright, no questions on the mini brief. A good example of why it's 2 crew. I think I actually missed taxiway echo. That's okay. We'll take this parallel. But that's why you have 2 guys running this stuff, because put your head down for a little bit, you go right past something. Yeah, we're on Lima, so hey, ground, can we take Lima? Like, yeah, Lima's approved. Alright, good, because I'm already on it. So, now, once we're clear of turns and all that, we do a taxi checklist. Starts out with a flight control check. So I'll go ahead and move the flight controls. Full up. Full down. Neutral. Full left. Full right. Neutral. Also, we're looking here. You can tell that the ailerons have drooped. We are now in aileron droop. We can tell when we go full deflection. The deflection is limited to the bottom of that white box. That is also correctly simulated. This aileron droop refers to the Florence kit, adds a little bit of performance to the aircraft, helps you create a little bit of lift. Also on touchdown, the ailerons will deflect up, kind of like a little bit of speed brakes, help reduce or help increase your landing performance. Alright, so the flight controls have been checked. We'll also check the rudder, and check the rudder without steering all over the place. You press the disconnect here, and now we can go ahead and use the rudders. Full left, full right, neutral. And then after the first officer checks his flight controls, we're going to go auto brakes max, takeoff config check, radar and PWS would come on. Transponder, we're now going to go ahead and put it into TARA, and then I'll make a little PA, which would be right here. Flight attendants prepare for takeoff. And at this point, we can run the before takeoff checklist all the way through. Before takeoff checklist all the way through. Gross weight comparison is complete. Pitch trim. 0.6% CG set. V1, VR, V2 flex. 153, 155, 163, flex 55, set. Flaps, configuration 1+F. Flight controls, checked. Flight instruments, checked. When we're checking our flight instruments, we want to make sure we see one FD2 here. Everything else here that we always check in any aircraft, but you also want to make sure you have an additional one FD2. You don't want to see any dashes. You don't want to see that. You want to make sure both pilots are one FD2. ECAM status is checked. PWS is on auto. TCAS, code set, TARA, cabin crew has been advised. Mini briefs complete. Runway, we're going off of runway 17 right. Fuel, 9.0 required, 9.3 on board. Engine mode selector normal. Bleeds and packs are set, lights out. Before takeoff checklist complete. Alright, as we approach the runway, we're expecting to hear takeoff clearance. Flight factor 320, DFW tower, runway 17 right. RNAV to LARN, clear for takeoff. RNAV to LARN, runway 17 right, clear for takeoff, flight factor 320. We'll go ahead and get the lights on. Strobes come on. Wings come on. Line up on the runway. We want to check our runway heading. Then we'll check 176. Remember, we started a timer. We have 5 minutes warm up. The engine is good. I'll ask the guy next to me, hey, you ready to go? And say, yeah. Clear for takeoff. Here we go. We'll spool them up to 50%. And straight to the Flex T10. Man Flex, SRS runway, auto thrust is blue. .80 knots, thrust set. Checked. V1. Rotate. Positive rate, gear up. Nav. And that is going to do it for our first video from the before start, pre-flight, all the way to taxi and takeoff and a normal day as an Airbus pilot. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. There's going to be more coming. We'll pick up here right where we left off on the departure. We'll redo the takeoff as well, and we'll have that video coming out very soon. I hope you enjoyed this. If you want more technique or systems related videos, check out the Pro Series I have coming out on my channel as well. Thanks again for watching, guys. I'll catch you on the next video.